You are standing in the very heart of Rome as history turns the key in the lock of a new era, and you hear a new power being born within the marble walls. The air is thick with exhaustion, the eyes of the crowd filled with fear and indifference, the streets drowned in the shadow of inevitability. The triumph that was supposed to embody hope now spreads through the city like a murky wave, not joy, but weary acceptance. You are a living witness to a great victory, one that has frozen the faces and dimmed the dreams of everyone around you. Rome is celebrating a new age, but in these festivities, there is neither sincerity nor future, only a long night on the threshold of oblivion. Welcome to an era where everything becomes new, only to grow old as quickly as possible. But before you settle in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is for you. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now, make yourself comfortable. We are about to begin. You step into Rome, the eternal city, although you sometimes suspect that eternal is merely another word for never changing, regardless of how much you wish it would. The air hangs heavy with a late summer stillness, damp and almost resentful, as if the gods themselves are weary of the city's endless drama. The marble walls, so recently cleaned in anticipation of victory, somehow seem more worn than before, streaked with the dull gray of too many years and too many triumphs. They gaze back at you, impassive and unsympathetic, as if to say, "You again? Are you not tired yet?" You join the slow moving river of humanity flowing through the city gates, and it becomes quickly obvious that no one is particularly excited to be here. The people of Rome do not rush, they trudge. Old men lean on walking sticks and whisper conspiratorially to one another, and women balance baskets filled with wilted greens, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting to see something more interesting than another parade of victorious soldiers. But there is only you, and you are quite ordinary. Above, a flock of pigeons circles aimlessly, perhaps wishing they could escape this dull scene for somewhere more lively. Alexandria, maybe, or Carthage, which is now only ruins anyway, thanks to some past glorious victory that no one remembers fondly. Even the animals seem subdued. One mangy dog picks its way through discarded olive pits and sighs, a canine philosopher contemplating the futility of empire. It is impossible to ignore the sense of anticipation, but it is not the anticipation of celebration. It is more like the feeling one has before a long, mandatory lecture, a knowledge that something important will be said, but also that it will take too long and you have no way out. The city is dressed for a festival, garlands hung from doorways, and banners bearing the likeness of Gaius Octavius, Augustus, as he insists on being called now, drape from balconies. Even the colors look tired, faded red and dull gold. You wonder how much of the paint was left over from last year's parade or the year before that. You find yourself standing near the edge of the forum, an enormous space ringed by more marble, each stone a monument to an earlier, better age, or so the stories go. The forum is already crowded, and the best spots have been taken by those who got here at sunrise or who bribed a guard to let them through. You squeeze between a pair of plump merchants, their faces flushed with the strain of standing so long, and a group of bored legionaries who look like they would rather be anywhere else. The only people with any energy are the children, darting between legs, hoping for dropped coins or stray fruit. You take a deep breath, hoping the moment will feel historic. Instead, it just smells like dust, sweat, and overripe figs. A nearby vendor hawks stale bread, and you watch as a Roman matron buys a loaf, examines it, sighs, and tosses it to her slave. Nothing ever really changes, you think, not even at the birth of a new age. The bells begin to ring, signaling that something, somewhere, is about to happen. Perhaps Augustus is approaching, or perhaps it is only a rehearsal. The crowd stirs, but does not cheer. This is Rome, a city where even celebration has become routine. You glance up at the marble walls, and for a moment, you imagine you see them frown, as if they know exactly how little you expect from the day. You look around at the faces, some hopeful, some resigned, a few openly hostile. Everyone here has lost something to the last decade of civil wars. Fathers, sons, fortunes, faith. Now there is only waiting, and the vague promise that this time things will be different. You know, as everyone knows, that this is unlikely, and so you stand, shifting your weight from foot to foot as the morning stretches into afternoon. The marble walls offer no comfort. They are the silent witnesses to the rise and fall of 1,000 men greater than you, greater, perhaps, even than Augustus. If they could speak, they would say, "We have seen it all before." You begin to suspect you have too. You have been standing here for what feels like several lifetimes. The sun, such as it is, crawls reluctantly across the sky, periodically hiding behind indifferent clouds. Around you, the citizens of Rome do what they have always done. They wait. Waiting has become their only reliable tradition, and you find yourself swept along in the inertia of collective patience, a patience worn thin by years of promises and shattered by endless rumors. The crowd is an impressive gathering, though not a cheerful one. There are men with missing fingers and sunburnt faces, their expressions carved into permanent skepticism by too many betrayals. They talk in low voices about the last time they gathered here, when Antony paraded through the forum, only to be driven out not long after. The stories all sound the same now. Change comes and change goes, and the only thing that remains is the need to keep showing up, to keep hoping, or at least pretending to hope, that this time will be different. You listen to their conversations, a chorus of grievances and half remembered victories. "Remember when the Republic meant something?" an old woman asks, not really expecting an answer. "Remember when consuls had real power?" replies another, her voice dry as the Tiber in midsummer. There are nods of agreement, but no one sounds convinced. The Republic is a ghost that haunts these people, rattling its chains whenever someone mentions honor or duty or the will of the Senate and the people of Rome. You realize, with a dull sort of wonder, that most people here do not actually believe in the promise of the new age. They are simply too exhausted to resist it. Over the past decade, they have learned to endure endless changes in government, one triumvir after another, shifting allegiances, sudden purges, and hurried declarations of loyalty. They have learned through a slow process of attrition that ideals are dangerous luxuries. Pragmatism is safer. Now they stand in the forum, not because they expect anything miraculous, but because absence is suspicious, and suspicion is dangerous. You watch as a group of young men, dressed in the battered cloaks of discharged soldiers, pass around a flask. Their laughter is brittle, tinged with something that might once have been hope. One of them boasts, too loudly, about his service under Antony, only to be silenced by a friend's elbow in the ribs. Augustus's name is spoken with careful respect. You notice the way people say it, not with love, not even with admiration, but with the wariness of someone invoking the weather, a fact of life, impossible to change. At your feet, a stray cat picks through the crowd, pausing at every outstretched hand, every morsel of bread. Even the animals have learned to be patient. Somewhere behind you, a vendor is shouting prices for roasted chestnuts, but nobody bothers to haggle anymore. Everyone knows the value of a denarius changes by the week, sometimes by the day. Inflation is a new god, cruel and unpredictable. You take a moment to examine the faces around you. There are mothers clutching their children, shielding them from the press of bodies. There are stoic fathers, their jaws set in silent resignation. There are old men who remember Sola, or claim they do, and who seem to exist only to complain about how things were better, or at least different, in their youth. There are slaves, barely distinguishable from their masters, all equally weary, all equally uncertain about what the future will bring. You are struck by how little joy is present. Even the children, usually immune to the grimness of adult affairs, play without enthusiasm. They mimic the motions of soldiers, brandishing imaginary swords and issuing hollow orders, but their hearts are not in it. The wars have taken something from everyone, even those too young to know exactly what has been lost. Every so often, someone in the crowd will start a cheer, attempting to rouse a bit of excitement. The attempt fizzles almost immediately, met with polite but perfunctory applause. You get the sense that these people have been instructed on how to behave, told by someone, perhaps a local official or a passing centurion, that they must look grateful, must look inspired, must look as if they believe. Their eyes betray them. The only thing they truly believe in now is survival. You look up at the buildings surrounding the forum. Their facades are decorated with laurel wreaths and painted banners, but the paint is already peeling and the wreaths are wilted. A metaphor, you think, for the city itself, decorated for triumph, but rotting beneath the surface. It occurs to you that there are fewer and fewer truly old men in Rome these days. The city eats its elders, its wise men, its inconvenient witnesses. Those who survive have become experts in forgetting, in telling half truths, in pretending that nothing ever really changes. You wonder briefly, what will become of this crowd? What will become of you once the triumph is over and the banners come down? A trumpet sounds somewhere nearby, a thin and uninspired note. The crowd shifts, craning their necks to see what is happening, but no one pushes forward with any urgency. There is a collective sense that whatever is about to occur is both inevitable and underwhelming. You feel it too, a quiet acceptance that Rome's golden age, if it ever existed, has slipped away unnoticed. And still you wait, not out of hope, but out of habit, because this is what Romans do. They gather, they grumble, they endure. The city is a monument to patience, to the slow wearing down of ideals, to the persistent, grinding machinery of empire. You are a witness to the beginning of a new age, but you suspect it will feel exactly like the old one. The marble walls look on in silence, and you join your fellow citizens in waiting for whatever comes next, not because you believe it will be better, but because you have nothing else to do. The morning, if it can be called that, is a colorless smear above the city. The Roman sky has never been especially generous with light, but today it seems actively spiteful. A flat, unremarkable gray presses down on the city, draining even the illusion of celebration from the air. There is no hint of a sunrise, no cheerful breeze, only a faint drizzle that cannot quite be called rain, but manages to make everything and everyone slightly damp. You pull your cloak tighter, though it does little to ward off the chill that seeps through the stones beneath your feet. The people around you share your discomfort, but none of them complain aloud. Complaining would require energy, and after so many years of uncertainty, the citizens of Rome have learned to conserve their strength. Instead, they stand in sullen silence, occasionally shifting their weight or adjusting a sodden tunic. The sky, in its indifference, becomes a silent commentator on the events unfolding below. You imagine the gods looking down, unimpressed by mortal pageantry. Perhaps Jupiter is bored, perhaps Mars is sulking, perhaps Venus has gone to Greece. In any case, the heavens do not bless this day with light. The banners, which yesterday looked dull, now seem almost funereal against the washed out sky. The laurel wreaths glisten with moisture, their green muted and uninspired. A line of soldiers marches past, their armor no longer gleaming, but dulled by the mist. You watch as the once golden helmets blend into the grayness, their wearers anonymous and unremarkable. It is difficult to tell if these men feel pride or simply resignation. The clatter of their boots echoes hollowly through the forum, a sound that once might have signaled triumph, but now seems more like a reminder of how many times this scene has played out before. As the procession advances, you notice the faces of those watching. The elders nod gravely, as if to confirm that yes, this is how history always unfolds. The powerful parade through the streets, while the rest look on, growing older and more tired with each passing year. The young seem unimpressed, their eyes drifting to anything more interesting than the spectacle at hand: a pigeon landing on a statue, a merchant arguing over a coin, a puddle reflecting the pale sky. Somewhere in the distance, a priest chants prayers to the gods, but his voice is swallowed by the damp air. You wonder if the gods are listening, or if they too have turned away, bored by the repetition. The sacred fires burn low, their smoke rising sluggishly into the sky, where it mingles with the ever present gray. There is no thunder, no omen, not even a passing flock of birds to interpret. The augurs, you suspect, are as uninspired as everyone else. You remember stories told to you as a child, stories of bright, glorious days, when the city was alive with color and song, when victories were greeted by sunshine and the cheers of a grateful people. Perhaps those days existed. More likely, they are just stories, repeated so often that even the oldest citizens believe them. Now, you think, the city has grown accustomed to disappointment. A child beside you tugs at her mother's sleeve, asking when the celebration will begin. The mother, her eyes fixed on the procession, does not answer. She knows, as you do, that the celebration has already begun, though it hardly feels like one. It is simply the next item on an endless list of public obligations, a performance required by the state, endured by the people, ignored by the sky. The drizzle intensifies, turning the ground to slick mud. A senator, dressed in what was once pristine white, slips as he ascends the steps of the rostra. The crowd suppresses a laugh, not out of respect, but out of habit. Laughter is dangerous now. Better to remain quiet, to let the rain cover any reaction. The senator regains his footing, his dignity only slightly damaged, and proceeds to deliver a speech that is lost to the gray air. The soldiers continue their slow march, their faces expressionless. You try to imagine what they are thinking, these men who have fought and bled for a cause that has shifted so many times, it is hard to remember what victory is supposed to mean. Perhaps they are thinking of home, or perhaps they are simply counting the steps until they can disappear back into the city and blend into the anonymity of peace. You look up again at the sky, hoping for some sign, any sign, that this day matters. But the heavens remain silent and gray, as unmoved by Augustus's triumph as by the thousand other triumphs that have come before. The rain, if it can be called that, seeps into the stones, into your bones, into the memory of the city itself. At last, the imperial procession appears. Augustus himself, riding in a chariot drawn by white horses, their flanks flecked with mud. His face is composed, almost serene, as if he alone believes in the importance of this moment. Or perhaps he is simply very good at pretending. The crowd offers polite applause, nothing more. Even the slaves tasked with scattering rose petals look bored, dropping the flowers with the mechanical precision of men who know their role is purely decorative. You wonder what Augustus sees as he surveys the crowd. Does he notice the lack of enthusiasm, the absence of true celebration? Or is he content with the appearance of support, the illusion of unity? You suspect it hardly matters. In Rome, appearances have always mattered more than reality. The gray sky, for its part, offers no opinion. The chariot rolls past, leaving ruts in the soft earth. Behind it, officials in their togas follow, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of solemnity. Somewhere, a crier announces the achievements of the new emperor, his words vanishing into the damp. You catch a few phrases: peace restored, order returned, glory of Rome. They sound impressive, but you know better. Words are like banners, bright at first, but quickly faded by rain. The procession continues, and the crowd resumes its waiting. There is no sense of release, no catharsis, only the knowledge that one more ritual has been completed, one more performance endured. The sky remains gray, the city remains silent, and you remain standing, wondering how many more times you will be called upon to witness history. You realize, as the last soldier disappears into the mist, that the most remarkable thing about this day is how utterly unremarkable it has been. The triumph of Augustus has come and gone, and the city is unchanged, except for a few more puddles and a little less hope. Above you, the marble walls glisten with moisture, watching as always, saying nothing. The sky, in its infinite grayness, refuses to care. The crowd has shifted, drawn toward the steps of the rostra by the promise, or perhaps the threat, of an imperial speech. The rain has slackened into a persistent mist that clings to togas and hair, beating on every exposed surface. You find yourself pressed between two officials, their faces set in the stony expressions of men determined to appear alert no matter how little they care. The entire city holds its collective breath, not out of anticipation, but out of the grim recognition that none will be permitted to breathe freely until Augustus has said his piece. A hush falls as Augustus ascends the steps, robes impeccable despite the weather, laurel wreath slightly askew but unbothered by the elements. He raises a hand. Instinctively, the crowd falls silent, though the silence is not reverent. It is merely a pause in the background hum of boredom, a courtesy extended to power. Augustus stands for a moment, surveying his audience. It is a studied pause, and you know he is measuring the effect, noting the droop of every eyelid, the subtle slouch of the veterans, the blank faces of the senators. His voice, when it comes, is clear, projecting not so much authority as inevitability. He speaks as a man who knows that to be emperor is not to inspire, but to endure the task of endlessly justifying one's existence. He begins with the usual recitation of achievements, his words rolling over the crowd in a flat, practiced cadence. You have heard this speech before, though perhaps not in these exact words. He names the tribes subdued: Thracians, Dalmatians, Gauls, Parthians, each syllable pronounced carefully, as if to wring the last drop of glory from names that mean little to the average Roman. He speaks of battles won, conspiracies foiled, a city brought back from the brink of destruction. You steal a glance at your neighbors. One is nodding, eyes unfocused, lips moving in silent calculation, perhaps tallying debts, perhaps counting the hours until this ordeal is over. Another gazes into the middle distance, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. A few listen intently, but you suspect they are paid to do so. Augustus recounts the reforms he has enacted, rebuilding temples, restoring the calendar, punishing the wicked, and rewarding the virtuous. He lists in excruciating detail the number of aqueducts repaired, the miles of road paved, the coins minted with his own image. You marvel at his endurance. It is a triumph of stamina rather than spirit. There is no poetry in his words, only the relentless grind of bureaucracy. He lingers on the restoration of order, as if repeating the phrase enough times will make it true. He reminds the people of Rome how close they came to destruction, how fragile peace can be. He paints himself as both savior and servant, a man burdened by the weight of power, sacrificing for the good of the many. You note how easily he glides past the cost. How many bodies, how many exiles, how many forgotten names have been swept aside in the pursuit of stability. From time to time, the crowd offers a ripple of applause. It is always at the expected moments, never spontaneous. You join in, clapping dutifully, careful to look neither too enthusiastic nor too disinterested. Augustus is an expert in such things. He knows how to read a crowd. The applause never seems to touch him. He moves methodically from point to point, as if checking off a list. The speech continues. Augustus thanks the gods, as protocol demands. He honors the Senate, though you sense he no longer bothers to pretend he believes in its power. He invokes the glory of Rome, the destiny of the people, the eternal promise of greatness. The words have the weight of tradition, but none of its warmth. They fall like coins into a well, producing only a faint echo. You begin to lose track of time. The sky grows darker, or perhaps your mind simply drifts. At one point, Augustus pauses for dramatic effect, and for a heartbeat, the crowd seems to hope it is over. But no, he resumes, recounting his lineage, his devotion to Julius Caesar, his willingness to forgive former enemies, provided, of course, that they are useful. Your thoughts wander. You wonder how many times in history crowds like this have gathered, how many speeches have rung out across the forum, promising rebirth and renewal. You imagine all the ears that have been numbed by rhetoric, all the hearts that have learned to beat in time with the slow, steady march of empire. A cold wind blows through the crowd, and a woman near you shivers, drawing her shawl tighter. Her child fidgets, tugging at her sleeve. Augustus speaks of future generations, of children who will inherit a city free from civil strife, but his words seem curiously disconnected from the reality in front of him. The people of Rome listen, but their eyes betray no dreams. At last, after what feels like an age, Augustus approaches the conclusion. He invokes fate, virtue, and the blessings of the gods. He assures the people that Rome's best days are yet to come, that their patience and sacrifice will be rewarded, that history will remember them as the generation that restored greatness. There is a final call for unity, a final appeal to duty. The applause is longer now, not because the crowd is moved, but because they sense an ending and are eager to hasten its arrival. Augustus smiles, a thin, practiced expression, and descends from the rostra. The people begin to disperse, relief palpable even through the drizzle. You remain standing for a moment, letting the silence settle over you. The speech is over, the triumph continues, the new era has officially begun. But all you feel is tired, as if the very act of witnessing history has drained something vital from you. The marble walls watch on, unimpressed. Rome endures, speeches come and go, and you, like everyone else, are left to wonder whether anything has truly changed at all. The speech is over, but its echoes linger in the damp Roman air, merging with the everyday sounds of shuffling feet and low conversation. As the crowd begins to fragment, you drift through its currents, catching snatches of forced applause that fade as quickly as they begin. In the confusion of dispersal, faces turn toward each other, some familiar, some newly irrelevant. You are left with the uncomfortable sense that you are not only an observer of history, but also its unwilling participant. You wander near the edge of the triumphal route, where the real theater begins, not in the words from the rostra, but in the silent performances happening among the citizens. Here, on the fringes, you encounter the true survivors of the civil wars, the men and women who once swore oaths to different leaders, the veterans of causes now officially erased from memory. It is impossible to miss the way their eyes flicker when they see each other, tiny, involuntary glances that reveal more than any speech ever could. You catch the eye of a man whose face is both young and impossibly old, the kind of face that has seen too many summers and too many changes in fortune. His tunic, once the color of Antony's house, is now carefully neutral, the insignia unpicked and replaced by something more palatable to the new regime. You remember seeing him once, years ago, shouting himself hoarse for the honor of Marcus Antonius, boasting that no other general could restore Rome. Now he keeps his head bowed, applauding at the right moments, his loyalty rewritten with the neatness of a careful scribe. Nearby, a group of older men exchange awkward pleasantries, each phrase weighed and measured for possible consequences. You recognize one, a former senator whose estates were briefly seized under the prescriptions of the last war. Once, he was a lion in the Senate, roaring against tyranny. Now, he nods deferentially whenever the name Augustus is mentioned, his words as thin and brittle as parchment. His eyes, however, retain a haunted quality, as if constantly scanning for a threat that could appear at any moment. You pass by another knot of citizens, younger this time, but just as practiced in the art of public performance. These are the veterans of Brutus and Cassius, the so-called liberators, whose cause was snuffed out at Philippi. Once, they wore their defeat openly, a badge of stubborn pride. Now, they wear the same togas as everyone else, their sashes the same dull white, their voices the same dull monotone. They laugh too loudly at a passing official's joke, their laughter ringing false in the heavy air. You wonder what they remember in the quiet moments. If the faces of lost friends still flicker behind their eyes, if the songs of the old Republican days still haunt their dreams, perhaps they have trained themselves not to remember at all. The price of survival, after all, is forgetfulness. Here and there, you spot members of the old families, descendants of Sulla, of Pompey, of men whose statues now gather pigeon droppings in forgotten corners of the city. They stand straight, they wear the right smiles, but there is no mistaking the tension in their posture. Even now, even with the war long over, their loyalty is measured in careful gestures and rehearsed lines. Their children, ignorant or pretending to be, play nearby, their games carefully observed by watchful mothers. You sense the presence of spies, though you cannot see them. Perhaps it is only paranoia, or perhaps the habit of suspicion has simply become part of Roman life. Every conversation is halting, every greeting formal and brief. To speak too freely is to invite attention. To remember the wrong victories is to risk exile or worse. In this new Rome, silence is the safest language. As the triumph proceeds along its route, the crowd reshapes itself around Augustus, offering the appearance of unity. You watch as a former officer of Antony's legions bows deeply as the emperor passes, his eyes never meeting those of his old adversaries. A young noblewoman, her father executed for siding with Brutus, throws a handful of withered flowers before the imperial chariot, her face a mask of studied devotion. You notice in the smallest details how easily old loyalties are disguised as new allegiances. The ceremonies of reconciliation are everywhere. The exchange of gifts, the forced smiles, the empty toasts. Augustus, for his part, moves through the charade with practiced indifference. He accepts their homage, their words of praise, their promises of fealty, never once acknowledging the deep undercurrent of fear that binds these former enemies to him. You realize, with a dull sort of wonder, that his greatest victory is not over foreign tribes or distant provinces, but over the hearts of his own citizens. As you move through the forum, you become acutely aware of the weight of memory pressing down on everyone. The past, once so dangerous, now exists only as a shadow on the edges of conversation. Names that were once spoken with pride, Cicero, Cato, Cassius, are now only whispered, if at all. Their statues remain, but the stories attached to them have grown vague, rewritten to suit the needs of the present. History, it seems, is the first casualty of peace. The day drags on, and the crowd thins, but those who remain perform their roles with the perseverance of actors who know the show cannot end. You exchange glances with a woman who once poured libations at the altar of liberty. Her hands are still, but her eyes flicker with a brief, bitter spark of recognition. You do not speak, There is nothing left to say that is safe to say. Above it all, the marble statues gaze down, impassive as ever. They have seen more betrayals than you could count, more reversals of fortune than any chronicler could record. In their silence, you hear the unspoken truth. The only real victory in Rome is survival. You turn away from the procession, feeling the eyes of former enemies and uncertain friends lingering on your back. For today, at least, you will play your part. In the new age of Augustus, loyalty is just another mask, worn for as long as it is required, then discarded when the next victor demands it. And so, with the city still echoing with false cheers and forced laughter, you melt into the crowd, another face among many, another voice swallowed by the indifferent gray of the Roman sky. By the time the imperial procession vanishes from sight, the city has started to breathe again, but it is a shallow, uncertain breath. The crowd on the forum drifts apart, leaving behind only the most determined of spectators and a scattering of officials who cannot risk being seen as anything less than attentive. You linger, half out of habit and half from a dull curiosity about what spectacle comes next. Rome is nothing if not a city of routines, and the next act always follows the last. Near the Senate House, a handful of senators gather beneath a canopy, their white togas already streaked with mud and the memory of rain. They stand in loose formation, clutching scrolls and muttering to one another, as if unsure whether this, too, is for show or for some actual purpose. A crier calls the people's attention, announcing that the Senate is to meet and discuss matters of great importance. The words, though, carry little weight. You look around and see that almost nobody else is paying attention. The citizens of Rome have learned that the Senate's meetings are like the weather, always threatening a storm, but usually amounting to nothing more than clouds and wind. The crowds that once hung on every senatorial debate, cheering and booing from the steps of the Curia, are nowhere to be found. In their place, only a few idle slaves linger, and some elderly men whose devotion to the Republic is either stubbornness or a lack of anything better to do. A fruit vendor, stationed at the edge of the forum, mutters a joke to his neighbor as the senators process inside, and the two share a laugh. Nobody bothers to hush them. You recall a time, distant but not quite forgotten, when such disrespect might have earned a sharp reprimand or even a fine. Now, the most anyone can muster is a shrug. The Senate debates, the city moves on. You notice a group of artisans nearby, their faces smeared with dust, and the tired resignation of men who know they will be the last to benefit from any decree. One of them glances at the Curia, then turns away to resume a conversation about the price of olive oil. To them, the Senate is as distant as the gods, capricious, unpredictable, and most of all, irrelevant. They know that real power now resides elsewhere. A mother drags her children across the forum, barely pausing as the senators march by in their ceremonial order. The children, bored and hungry, tug at her skirts, eager for bread or figs, or some distraction more entertaining than the sight of old men shuffling in circles. The mother's face is drawn and pale, her eyes scanning the crowd not for inspiration, but for signs of trouble: a pickpocket, a drunken soldier, a bored official looking for someone to arrest. You hear the senators begin their speeches from inside the curia, the drone of their voices carrying faintly through the open doors. There is a ritual to their arguments: praise for Augustus, condemnation of unnamed threats, and the endless repetition of promises to serve the people. The words tumble over each other, smooth as pebbles worn down by centuries of use. You wonder if the senators themselves believe in any of it, or if the whole exercise has become as meaningless to them as it is to everyone else. One senator, younger than most, steps forward to deliver a particularly passionate speech about restoring dignity to the Republic. His voice rises above the rest, earnest and clear. You watch as a few bystanders pause, curiosity piqued, but after only a moment they turn away, unmoved. You feel a twinge of pity for the young man. He has not yet learned that oratory, once the weapon of statesmen and saviors, is now little more than background noise. The city has other concerns. Merchants haggle over shipments delayed by rain. Bakers grumble about the rising cost of grain. Housewives trade rumors about new taxes and stricter laws. In the alleyways, children play at being legionaries and emperors, never once pretending to be senators. Even the beggars have abandoned the curia, knowing that pity is more easily found near the temples and taverns than among those who claim to speak for the people. You catch the eye of an old man, his back bent, his hands knotted with age and labor. He stands just close enough to hear the speeches, his lips moving silently as if reciting prayers or curses from a time when the Senate mattered. You wonder if he remembers the names of the great orators: Cicero, Cato, Hortensius, or if, like everyone else, he has begun to forget. Above it all, the city carries on. Ox carts rumble past, children chase stray dogs, pigeons flutter from statue to statue. The life of Rome pulses with its own rhythm, untouched by the deliberations of the men in white. You realize that the Senate has become little more than a stage, its actors going through the motions for an audience that has long since left the theater. In the end, the only ones who seem to care are the senators themselves, and even they look exhausted by the charade. You watch as they emerge from the curia, faces grave, voices solemn, announcing decisions that will change nothing. The citizens do not gather to listen. Instead, they go about their business, trusting that whatever the Senate decrees, the true shape of their lives will be decided elsewhere, by Augustus, by the army, by the whims of fate. You turn away, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. There is no excitement, no anger, only the slow erosion of old traditions, ground down to dust beneath the wheels of empire. The Senate debates, the people endure, and the city continues, indifferent as always. The marble pillars of the curia cast long shadows across the emptying forum. You watch as the last of the spectators drift away, their backs turned to the place where the Republic once lived. Somewhere, a bell rings, calling the faithful to a temple, and the echo fades quickly in the damp Roman air. It occurs to you as you walk away that nobody really misses what is gone. The Senate remains, but its voice is faint, a ghost among the living. Rome belongs to the future now, and the people have learned to look past the old halls of power, to the palace, to the barracks, to wherever the true decisions are made. You disappear into the crowd, another anonymous figure in a city that has grown too wise, or perhaps too tired, to believe in the Senate's importance any longer. If there is one constant in Rome, it is that the scribes are never idle. You notice them now, clustered in the shade of porticos and under arches, their wax tablets slick with rain, their styluses darting across the surface with well practiced haste. They do not bother to listen closely to the words of the crowd or the senators. What matters is what ought to have been said, not what actually was. In the uneasy hush following the Senate's empty pronouncements, the real work begins. History is being written, and you know better than to trust any of it. The city, still wet from the persistent drizzle, glimmers under the early afternoon light. As you wander the edges of the forum, you see an official herald approach a group of chroniclers, delivering a scroll with neat red ribbons. The scroll's wax seal bears the unmistakable imprint of Augustus, so meticulously rendered that even the pigeons on the rooftops seem to recognize it. The scribes crowd closer, taking dictation, copying down the facts of the day with mechanical obedience. In their account, every event gleams with inevitability. Every triumph is larger, every discord is smaller, every cheer is louder than it ever was in life. You cannot help but notice how quickly reality is transformed into legend. A ragged handful of bystanders clapped when Augustus finished his speech, but by evening the chronicles will report a thunderous ovation, the sort not heard since the days of Scipio Africanus. The scattered shouts of bored children will become the voice of Rome united, crying out their love for the emperor. Even the sullen silence of the crowd is conveniently omitted. There is no room for reluctance in the narrative of a new era. The chroniclers, for their part, seem entirely unfazed by the disconnect. One, a balding, round faced man in a wine stained tunic, leans in to ask an official how many senators applauded. All of them, naturally, comes the reply, and the scribe nods, satisfied. On the margins of his wax tablet, you see a careless tally mark beside the number all. Numbers written, not counted, truth, corrected for official consumption. Occasionally, a passerby tries to correct the record. You watch as an elderly woman, emboldened by years or perhaps by disappointment, tells a group of scribes that she remembers the speech quite differently. He promised bread, not glory, she insists, and nobody cheered. The scribes glance at each other and quickly move on, their tablets undisturbed by her inconvenient recollections. Memory, after all, is dangerous business. Word spreads through the forum. The official record of the day's events will be read aloud at dusk. You stay to listen, mostly for the dark amusement of it. The crier's voice is thin but practiced, shaping the day into a sequence of inevitable victories and perfectly loyal citizens. You hear your own experience recited back to you, warped and polished, until it is almost unrecognizable. Every awkward pause in the speech has become a dramatic silence. Every glance between former enemies, a gesture of reconciliation and hope. Even the sky, which you distinctly recall as unrelentingly gray, is transformed in the narrative into a canvas for omens and divine approval. The people in the forum do not seem surprised. Some shake their heads, some smirk, but most accept the narrative as they accept the weather, another fact of life, no more or less negotiable than the price of olives or the pattern of taxes. A young man beside you, a soldier home from distant campaigns, grins as he listens. They will say we cheered, he says to his companion, and soon enough we will remember that we did. His friend laughs. You do not. It strikes you that history is not being recorded here. It is being manufactured, pressed into shape by the will of those with the power to define what counts as fact. The stories you learned as a child are shifting beneath your feet, like the paving stones of the Forum after heavy rain. Julius Caesar's assassination, the Battle of Actium, even the famine 2 winters ago, each retold to suit the mood of the present, each losing its jagged edges, becoming smooth, harmless, official. As the sun lowers behind the marble temples, you see children running in the porticos, playing at being chroniclers. One child, barely able to hold a stylus, announces in a thin, high voice, "Today Augustus became the father of Rome," and everyone sang for joy. The others cheer, though you hear a few giggles mixed in with the shouts. You wonder how long it will take for the game to become belief, for these children to forget that anything else ever happened. Even the statues are not safe. A team of workers, under the supervision of a sweating clerk, affixes a new plaque to the base of a weathered figure, a general whose loyalties were once suspect. The inscription now proclaims him an early supporter of Augustus, his crimes scrubbed from the official memory. You see a few passers-by pause, trying to recall what the old plaque said, but already their doubts fade. The new story is simpler, easier to remember, easier to repeat. Night falls, and the city grows quieter, but the scribes are still at work. You glimpse them by lamplight in the doorways of taverns, swapping the day's notes, arguing over the best wording for the emperor's achievements. Some are cynical, some earnest, but all of them know their real audience is not the citizens of Rome, but Augustus himself. As you make your way home, you feel the weight of official history settling over the city, a soft, suffocating blanket that smooths every sharp edge and stifles every discordant note. The truth of what happened today is already slipping away, replaced by something safer, something easier to remember, something that can be repeated without fear. You wonder if, years from now, you will even recall how you felt in the gray light of this day. Perhaps you will find yourself telling your children that you too cheered for Augustus, that you too believed in the birth of a new era. Perhaps you will come to believe it. The marble walls, as always, remain silent. They have seen more versions of the truth than you can imagine. And as the city sinks into uneasy sleep, the only certainty is this: Rome will remember what it is told to remember, and nothing else. The evening settles uneasily over Rome, bringing with it the muted hush that follows any public spectacle. The crowd has dispersed, the banners hang limp and soggy, and the streets begin to empty of the day's excitement, or at least what passed for excitement in the tired city. You find yourself wandering through the quieter neighborhoods that radiate from the Forum, drawn by a vague curiosity about what remains of the old world now that the new age has officially begun. It is here, in the shadowy streets and among the faded porticos, that you see the other side of victory, not the parade or the speeches or even the scribes, but the people who once mattered and now linger in uncomfortable anonymity. The former heroes of Rome, those whose names were once spoken with awe, or, at the very least, with a grudging respect, are now reduced to little more than awkward shadows flickering at the edge of the city's memory. You pass the house of a once famous general, its facade now noticeably unadorned. The banners and insignia that used to mark his allegiance have disappeared. Neighbors avert their eyes as they walk past. Even the family's slaves speak more quietly these days, as if any sign of former pride might attract the wrong kind of attention. The general himself, if he still lives here, has not been seen in weeks. You suspect that, like so many others, he has retreated into the deep interior rooms of his house, waiting for the moment when it is safe to appear again, or for the moment when he is quietly exiled to some remote estate. In the market, you spot a man whose sharp profile and carefully controlled gait once marked him as a protege of Brutus. He buys fruit from a vendor who pretends not to know him, coins exchanged in silence. You remember a time when his name was whispered as a symbol of Republican courage. Now, the only whispers are those warning children to look away. His hair, once styled in the latest Greek fashion, is unremarkably cut. His clothes, once an emblem of his status, have lost all distinction. He glances at you, eyes flickering with suspicion or perhaps shame, and disappears down an alley. A short distance away, in a shadowy tavern, you overhear a conversation between two men who once served under Cassius. Their voices are low, their laughter strained, and when they mention old victories, they do so obliquely, as if discussing a play they once saw rather than a war they once fought. Even in their reminiscence, there is a careful absence of names. They do not say Cassius, nor Brutus, nor any other word that might mark them as dangerous. Instead, they speak of the old days, and then quickly move on to the price of wine or the latest news from the provinces. The statues fare little better. As you walk through a square near the Capitoline Hill, you see that the monument to Cato, once garlanded with laurel and flowers, now stands unadorned and stained by the droppings of indifferent pigeons. The inscription at its base is worn to illegibility. A pair of children clamber over the pedestal, their laughter echoing off the marble. No one shouts at them to show respect. You realize that for most people, these statues have become invisible, a part of the city's backdrop, no more meaningful than a cracked column or a broken paving stone. You pause by the forum, watching a group of former soldiers pass by. Their uniforms, such as they are, have lost all insignia. Once, they would have marched proudly, carrying standards or wearing medals that marked them as survivors of the great battles. Now, they hurry along, careful not to draw attention. You notice that the new coinage bearing Augustus's image passes easily from hand to hand, while the older coins are quietly pocketed or exchanged only among trusted friends. Even money is being rewritten. Occasionally, someone dares to mention the old heroes, but always in a cautious, almost apologetic tone. A wine merchant, half drunk and emboldened by the lateness of the hour, raises a glass to the brave men who tried, only to be shushed by his companions. You sense their discomfort, not because they disagree, but because to remember is to risk, and there is little appetite for risk these days. You recall stories your parents told you of feasts and festivals held in honor of victorious generals, nights of revelry that lasted until dawn, speeches that promised glory and hope. Now, the only stories told are safe ones: how Augustus restored order, how the city was saved, how the Republic's enemies were vanquished. The names of old heroes are left out or recast as villains in the new mythology. Even those who fought bravely are described, if at all, as misguided or tragic rather than valiant or worthy. At a bakery, you overhear a woman telling her son not to ask about his grandfather's medals. It is better, she whispers, to forget. The boy looks disappointed, but says nothing. You realize, with a cold pang, that forgetting has become a civic virtue, perhaps even a matter of survival. As darkness settles over the city, you walk past houses that once belonged to the most celebrated names in Rome: Scipio, Lucullus, Pompey, now occupied by lesser men, their old glories erased or repurposed. You catch the glint of a mosaic on a floor where once a general's victories were commemorated. Now, it has been patched over with the likeness of Augustus. A strange hush hangs over the city. You realize it is not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of something heavier, the weight of unspoken memory. The former heroes, the inconvenient friends, the ghosts of civil wars past, have all been banished to the periphery, living reminders of what must not be said. They walk Rome's streets with their heads down, living, but only barely. You wonder what will become of their stories, if they will vanish entirely, or linger only as rumors told quietly over cheap wine. You suspect that soon even those rumors will disappear, replaced by the tidy narratives favored by the chroniclers and their patrons. The New Age has no patience for ambiguity or dissent. It prefers its heroes simple, its victories absolute, its past untroubled by contradiction. You return home, your footsteps echoing in the dark, and realize that the city is quieter than you have ever known it. The marble statues remain, awkward shadows cast by torchlight, the ghosts of greatness that nobody dares to claim. And you, like everyone else, have learned to walk quickly, to speak carefully, to forget bravely, and to remember nothing at all. In the days following the triumph, you begin to notice how the great changes of empire filter down into the ordinary rhythms of daily life, not as thunderclaps of history, but as a slow, relentless drizzle, quiet, inevitable, and impossible to escape. The city's mood is not one of celebration, but of something closer to exhaustion, as if every citizen has lived through too many new beginnings to find much joy in another. You walk through the streets in the uncertain light of dawn, watching the city wake up. The market square is already busy, though the energy is sapped from the faces of merchants and customers alike. The bread on offer is the same as ever, hard, a little stale, and now stamped with a new imperial seal. The price, of course, has gone up. The baker explains with a shrug that it is a victory tax, as if such things need no further explanation. You watch a woman hesitate before handing over her coins, calculating whether the little she saves is worth the risk of hunger. On the street corners, new posters hang, promising a future of order and prosperity. The faces that used to stare down at you from painted boards, men with names like Cato, Cicero, and Cassius, have been scraped away or plastered over with the serene likeness of Augustus, whose eyes are always turned slightly heavenward, above and beyond the city's cares. Even the paint seems tired. The rain has begun to strip it away in places, leaving strange half faces and the faintest shadows of older times. The city's public fountains, once sites of noisy conversation, are now quiet. People come and go, barely pausing to exchange more than a nod or a cautious greeting. You remember how, not long ago, these places thrummed with rumors, the latest news from the Senate, the return of a victorious general, the whispers of conspiracy or hope. Now, the only topics are the price of olive oil, the new rules for street vendors, and, always, inevitably, the weather. Children play in the alleys, but their games have changed. Gone are the wild reenactments of famous battles, the shouts of "For the Republic" or "Liberty." Now, the games are simple and quiet. Who can stand the straightest? Who can recite the most imperial decrees? Who can go the longest without speaking? You hear one child chide another for using the old oath by Jupiter's honor instead of swearing by the fortune of Augustus. The change has crept in, subtle and thorough, rewriting even the language of play. You pass a small shrine dedicated to some half forgotten household god, its offerings sparse and wilted. Once, such shrines brimmed with flowers and coins, tended by hopeful hands wishing for a change in fortune. Now, most of the city's prayers are offered at the grander temples, where the ceremonies are longer and the priests more careful to invoke Augustus's name before any other. The old gods have not been banished, but their voices grow quieter, their altars dustier. In the taverns, the talk is cautious and bland. Nobody dares to reminisce too loudly about the days before Augustus, though now and then you catch a wry smile or a quickly stifled joke about the endless reforms. A new tax on wine has everyone grumbling, but only in private, and always with an eye on the door. You realize that even complaints have become dangerous, a kind of quiet rebellion that must be hidden behind routine. You notice the city's beggars have become more numerous, their voices sharper, their pleas more desperate. The wars have left their mark, and not all wounds heal with the passing of power. Some have taken to wearing small tokens bearing the emperor's likeness, hoping that a show of loyalty might bring more pity, or at least less trouble from the city guards. One old man, his leg twisted from an old campaign, sings a song about victory that nobody listens to. When you give him a coin, he does not thank you, only mutters, "May Augustus's luck fall on your house," as if it is the only blessing left to offer. You see the changes in the city's rhythm too. The curfew is enforced more strictly, and the city's watchmen march with new discipline. A group of young men are stopped and questioned for laughing too loudly in the street. Their laughter dies quickly, replaced by the careful, placid expressions everyone wears now. You feel the atmosphere thicken, heavier, more watchful, as if every shadow might hide an informant, or every careless word could be overheard. Even the festivals feel different. Where once the Saturnalia brought days of wild freedom and laughter, now the celebrations are more measured, the joy more forced. There are still parades, still feasts, but they are orchestrated from above, with lists of approved songs and sanctioned slogans. The city's spirit has not disappeared, but it has been harnessed, channeled into official forms that leave little room for the old improvisations. In your own home, you see the changes reflected in the smallest details. The stories told at the table are carefully chosen. The family's old medallions, prizes from past generations, are hidden away, and new coins with the emperor's face are displayed on the household altar. Your neighbors come and go with more discretion, their voices lower, their greetings shorter. Even your dreams have changed. You wake in the night unsure if you are remembering a real fear or simply the echo of so many anxious days. You realize, slowly, and with a kind of reluctant awe, that this is how an age ends, not with the clash of armies or the roar of crowds, but with the slow, grinding surrender of daily life to new habits, new rules, new silences. The city goes on, its marble streets and statues bearing witness to the change, but the people themselves seem smaller, shrunken by caution and routine. The triumph of Augustus is complete, not because he stands at the head of an army or delivers endless speeches, but because his presence has settled into every corner of existence, reshaping even the smallest details. Rome has been remade, not in a blaze of glory, but in the long shadow of exhaustion. And as you make your way home, beneath the watchful eyes of silent statues, You realize that the new age has already arrived, not with trumpets and banners, but with the quiet, persistent erasure of everything that came before. The next weeks and months blur together, not in a rush of excitement, but in a haze of paperwork, decrees, and ceaseless grinding reform. You cannot escape the sense that you are trapped in an enormous, joyless administration, the city itself transformed into a ledger where every aspect of life is to be counted, measured, and regulated. Augustus's promise of a new age reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in a constant, almost mechanical, reshuffling of laws and procedures. Nothing escapes the reformer's touch, not the military, not the markets, not the very calendar by which you mark the slow progress of days. You find yourself standing in line, again, outside the office of some minor official. The line is longer than you remember. It always is. Everyone has a petition or a complaint, a missing shipment of grain, a tax paid twice, a son conscripted by mistake. The officials behind the wooden desks wear the faces of men who once dreamed of glory, but now serve the empire with the sullen obedience of overworked clerks. You watch as they scribble notes on wax tablets, their hands moving with the mindless efficiency of men who know that nothing they write will ever be read by anyone who matters. Outside, a new notice is being nailed to a post, the letters large and precise, on the ordering of street vendors by decree of Augustus. You see people gather to read it, nodding as if they understand, though most will go home none the wiser. You overhear two merchants debating whether they must move their carts 3 paces to the left or 4 to the right, as if their very survival depends on this measurement. Perhaps it does. Even the smallest misstep can attract the attention of the city's newly energized inspectors, who have discovered an enthusiasm for fines that seems almost religious in its zeal. You remember the old jokes about Roman bureaucracy, how senators could debate the price of figs for a week, how city engineers could measure a sewer for a month without ever repairing it. Now, there are no jokes, only forms. Every aspect of civic life has been broken down into rules and categories. A new schedule for public works, a revised system of weights and measures, a carefully calculated ration of free grain. You watch your neighbor, an elderly widow, struggle to understand whether she qualifies for this week's bread or if her name was lost in the latest update to the register. Augustus's reforms are praised everywhere, of course. The chroniclers announce them with solemn gravity, a new law for the moral health of the city, a measure to restore the dignity of the Roman family, an edict for the defense of the frontiers. The words roll out in an endless stream, so many that you stop listening. After a while, the reforms blur together, each one indistinguishable from the last. You begin to wonder if Augustus even remembers all the changes he has made, or if the process of reform has become a sort of ritual necessary only because it is expected. In the military camps, discipline is enforced with a fresh severity. You hear stories of veterans reclassified, new legions raised, Old units disbanded or renamed to honor the emperor. The soldiers, who once swaggered through the city in celebration, now keep their heads down, wary of making a mistake in the new order. Promotions and punishments are handed out with equal regularity, and nobody is quite sure which is which. Even the centurions grumble, though only in the privacy of their tents. The markets, too, have changed. Where once chaos reigned, haggling, shouting, the colorful disorder of Rome at its most alive, now there is a sullen order. Prices are fixed, quantities are tracked, and every transaction is watched by an official whose loyalty is measured by the number of infractions he records. You watch a fishmonger caught selling yesterday's catch as fresh pay his fine without protest. It is simply the cost of doing business now, another number in the city's ledger. At home, you see the reforms seeping into daily life. The new rules for family conduct are posted at every intersection. Fathers must supervise sons. Wives must attend the prescribed sacrifices. Children must learn the correct prayers. Your neighbors debate which customs are now forbidden, which rituals are required. There is always a rumor of another inspection, another list, another reform in the works. The city is awash with inspectors and informers. A new class of minor officials appears, eager to prove their loyalty to the emperor by discovering lapses in others. You watch as they check the scales at a butcher's stall, measure the width of a baker's doorway, question a father about his son's attendance at the temple. Nobody resists. Resistance has become too complicated, too tiring. It is easier to nod, to smile, to pay the fine and move on. The streets themselves change. New milestones are set up, fresh paving stones are laid, but each improvement is accompanied by months of disruption. The traffic snarls, merchants complain, and the noise of construction never quite fades. You begin to hate the sound of hammers, the dust of progress, the endless parade of city workers with their official badges. The city seems to be rebuilding itself, not for the people, but for the sake of being rebuilt. You hear the phrase, for the good of Rome, repeated everywhere. It appears in speeches, in official documents, in the weary jokes of shopkeepers. But you have lived here long enough to recognize the hollow sound of it, the way it is used to justify every inconvenience, every intrusion, every new rule that makes life a little harder, a little more tedious. At night, you sit by your window and listen to the city sighing under the weight of its own reforms. The lamps flicker in the streets, and you hear the footsteps of the watchmen as they patrol in carefully measured intervals. You wonder if anyone, anywhere, actually feels safer, or if the sense of order is just another illusion, a polite fiction maintained to keep the machinery of empire running. The triumph of Augustus has become a kind of routine, one edict after another, one small change after another, until the only thing that seems truly new is your own exhaustion. The city moves forward, but it is not the eager stride of youth. It is the plodding march of a people who have learned to survive, by adapting, by accepting, by finding tiny comforts in the cracks left by endless reform. And so, you close your eyes and try to remember what Rome was like before order became the city's only virtue. But the memories fade quickly, buried beneath the weight of rules, and you drift into a dreamless sleep, waiting for the next decree. If you had thought the arrival of peace and order would bring confidence to the stewards of Rome, you were mistaken. The age of Augustus has not inspired boldness in the city's officials, but a peculiar, trembling sort of caution that permeates every office, every desk, every marble floored chamber where decisions are made. Rome, it seems, is now administered by men who have mastered the art of appearing busy while never, ever taking a risk. You see them everywhere, minor magistrates in freshly laundered togas, their faces frozen in that anxious half smile peculiar to bureaucrats on the brink of panic. Each one clutches a stack of tablets, each tablet containing lists and tallies and summaries, evidence of diligence but never of innovation. They glide through the city like ghosts of authority, careful to keep to the letter of every regulation, terrified of doing anything that might draw attention from above. In the forum, you watch as a junior quester prepares to open a session on market disputes. His voice trembles as he calls the names, his eyes darting between the crowd and the official posted to record every word. He allows no deviation from the agenda. A fishmonger's complaint about a rival's stall is met with a polite request for written evidence delivered in triplicate, as if the mere act of making a decision might stain the questor's toga forever. You realize that this fear is not unwarranted. The machinery of empire is greased by suspicion and maintained by the steady drip of denunciation. To be noticed is to be at risk. Already, you have heard stories of officials exiled for minor transgressions, an error in a tax record, an unapproved repair to a bridge, a phrase in a speech that could be read as criticism of the emperor. Even a gesture, a careless frown, or a joke told in the wrong company is enough to mark someone as suspect. One morning, you stand in line at a public office, waiting to pay a fee for the privilege of operating a stall in the market. The clerk at the window is a young man, his hands shaking slightly as he sorts the tablets. He checks your paperwork not once, but 3 times, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finds a date written incorrectly, he pauses, the color draining from his face. You expect him to correct it and move on, but instead, he asks you to return tomorrow with a new form, correctly dated and witnessed by 2 citizens. It is not that he wants to inconvenience you, it is simply that he dares not do anything else. The supervisor, a man of middle years and thinning hair, hovers nearby, his presence a constant warning. You see him reviewing every transaction, questioning every irregularity, making notes for later, perhaps to cover himself if anything goes wrong. He offers you a thin smile and wishes you a good day, but his eyes betray no warmth. You realize that he, too, is afraid of mistakes, afraid of being noticed, afraid of the silent, watching city. In the temples, the priests have developed their own brand of nervous piety. Every sacrifice is performed exactly as prescribed in the imperial edicts. Every prayer is recited in the approved form, every offering meticulously recorded. Once, the rituals were alive with improvisation and color. Now, the ceremonies have become a display of bureaucratic perfection, performed by men who watch one another more closely than they watch the gods. At the baths, you overhear conversations between officials comparing their workloads, each one lamenting the endless new rules, the impossible standards. They swap rumors of colleagues demoted or sent away for a misplaced word, a late report, an unapproved expenditure. One man, an idol with bags under his eyes, explains in a whisper that he has started sleeping in his office, too afraid to be away in case something happens overnight. His friend nods in sympathy, glancing nervously around to make sure they are not overheard. The citizens, for their part, have learned to adjust. When dealing with officials, you keep your voice even and your papers in order. You do not joke, you do not argue, you do not show impatience. You are polite, deferential, and above all, predictable. The officials appreciate this, though they would never say so. To them, the perfect citizen is one who does not force them to make decisions, one who can be processed and dismissed without incident. You witness, on more than one occasion, an official passing a difficult case to another, each trying to avoid the responsibility of judgment. Two inspectors stand in a street, arguing quietly over who should issue a fine to a merchant with an ambiguous permit. Neither wants to be the one whose name appears on the report. The merchant, sensing his advantage, offers to correct the mistake himself, and the officials agree, grateful for the chance to retreat. Even the city's architecture reflects this new caution. The grand monuments of the Republic, built by men eager to leave their mark, are now joined by buildings so bland and nondescript that they seem to apologize for their own existence. The plaques on new structures are written in the safest possible language, every word weighed and measured, each inscription double checked by committees. This is Rome under Augustus, a city ruled by fear of error, where safety lies in inaction and the greatest virtue is invisibility. The officials are not cruel, only cautious, servants of a system that values procedure above all else. Their ambition is not to change the world, but to survive within it. At night, you lie awake and wonder how long this new era of nervous order can last. You suspect the answer is as long as men are afraid, and as long as mistakes are punished more harshly than crimes. You fall asleep to the sound of shuffling feet, rustling tablets, and whispered prayers for safety. Small, uncertain hopes in a city where to be noticed is to be at risk, and to act is the greatest risk of all. There is a particular emptiness that settles over a city when its public rituals lose their meaning. You notice this most sharply during the official celebrations, those increasingly frequent days when Rome is commanded to remember her greatness, her unity, her eternal destiny under Augustus. The streets fill with banners and garlands, every arch hung with imperial emblems, every column draped with lengths of red and gold cloth. The preparations are meticulous, the instructions detailed and impossible to misunderstand. But the spirit is absent. You see it in every face. Early in the morning, as the latest festival approaches, you walk through the forum and see workers on ladders, tying fresh wreaths above the statues. The smell of crushed laurel and wet rope mixes with the ever present scent of dust. City officials walk briskly from one square to another, checking lists, correcting minor imperfections, a crooked standard here, a faded mural there. Each mistake is noted in a ledger to be explained to someone further up the chain. It is patriotism by checklist, devotion by decree. The citizens know what is expected of them. You see your neighbors digging out their best tunics, carefully sewing imperial badges to the sleeves. Children are marched out of their homes in neat lines, their hair combed and their faces scrubbed clean, each one clutching a little flag with the emperor's profile. The teachers bark instructions, wave when I say so, smile when the crier comes. Don't speak unless you are spoken to. The children nod, blank eyed, obedient. At the appointed hour, everyone gathers along the parade route. You take your place among them, squeezed between a stonecutter and a vegetable seller. The crier's voice is sharp as he reads out the program, where to stand, when to clap, how loudly to cheer. The crowd responds on cue, their applause perfectly synchronized, their cheers rising and falling with mechanical precision. No one makes a mistake. No one dares. As the procession passes, you watch a group of city workers carefully tossing petals in the emperor's path. The petals fall in orderly arcs, like coins scattered by an unseen hand. The emperor himself, standing tall in his chariot, acknowledges the crowd with a calculated wave and a measured smile. You wonder what he sees as he looks out. Thousands of faces performing loyalty, but none truly invested, none truly jubilant. After the parade, the city hosts a series of official games, races, performances, recitations of poetry written in honor of Augustus. The poets compete to outdo one another in praise, each line more extravagant than the last. The audience listens politely, applauds at the right moments, and then drifts away, their minds already turning to errands and chores. The poems are forgettable, their rhymes as forced as the enthusiasm that greets them. In the evening, you pass by the public squares where crowds are thin and scattered. Some citizens remain, listening to a choir sing the new patriotic hymns. The melodies are stirring enough, the lyrics carefully composed to invoke the glory of Rome and the blessings of Augustus. But the singers perform without passion, their voices rising not in celebration, but in compliance. It is music for inspectors, not for the soul. You see the new monuments everywhere, statues of Augustus in every district, inscriptions proclaiming the virtues of the emperor and the unity of the people. Even the city's water fountains are engraved with slogans. Rome endures through loyalty. All glory to Augustus. The people and the Senate united. You watch as a group of children recite these slogans for a passing official, each one rewarded with a copper coin. When the official is gone, the children argue over who will spend the coin, forgetting the words as quickly as they were learned. There is no anger in this new patriotism, only fatigue. You hear it in the voices of the market women who debate which slogan to paint on their shop walls, or whether it is safer to leave the wall blank. You see it in the eyes of the craftsmen who spend hours carving imperial likenesses they know will be replaced as soon as fashions change. There is a competition for the best likeness of Augustus, but nobody really wants to win. To stand out is dangerous. To be unnoticed is safer. You remember dimly the old festivals, rowdy, chaotic, full of genuine feeling. There were days when patriotism was an argument shouted over wine, a toast to a favorite general, a spontaneous cheer for some long forgotten victory. Now, everything is rehearsed. The songs are new, the banners brighter, the ceremonies more elaborate, but the heart of the city no longer beats in time with the celebrations. In your own household, the changes are small but telling. You keep a small bust of Augustus on the family altar, as everyone does. You light incense on prescribed days, offer fruit and bread, recite the required prayers. But your children are bored by the rituals, your spouse more interested in the quality of the incense than its significance. Even the household gods seem less attentive, their niches dusty and their faces faded. One evening, you find yourself at a dinner party where the conversation turns, inevitably, to matters of patriotism. Your host, a minor official, leads a toast to Rome, to Augustus, to eternal unity. The guests raise their cups, their voices perfectly in tune, their smiles polished and hollow. Someone tries to make a joke about the endless festivals, but it falls flat. Laughter is not dangerous, but it is out of place. Everyone quickly returns to safer topics: the weather, the price of fish, a rumor of new taxes. The city is covered in layers of official devotion. Patriotism is everywhere and yet nowhere. It has become a habit, a gesture, an act performed for others rather than for oneself. The people of Rome have learned to show loyalty without feeling it, to celebrate without joy, to cheer without conviction. As you walk home through streets lined with banners and statues, you feel the weight of so much empty enthusiasm pressing down on you. The city gleams with fresh paint and polished marble, but beneath the surface, you sense only weariness, resignation, and the quiet hope that someday something real might return. You realize as you pass yet another inscription, Rome rises through obedience, that the only thing rising in Rome these days is the tide of formality. Patriotism, like everything else, has become just another duty to perform, another line to repeat, another mask to wear until the next decree arrives. And so you join the crowd, smiling when required, singing when instructed, cheering on command. It is easier that way, safer that way, and perhaps in time you will forget that it was ever any different at all. The night after another festival, you find yourself drawn to the back streets where Rome's ordinary citizens gather, places far from the marble glare of monuments, from the scrutinizing eyes of officials. The city's taverns are alive with the familiar hum of voices and the earthy smell of sour wine, oil, and old sweat. It is here, beneath low ceilings and smoky lamplight, that you hope to glimpse something closer to truth, or at least to a memory of it. You take a seat in a corner, unnoticed among traders, laborers, freedmen, and the occasional off duty soldier. The walls are stained with generations of spilled drink and laughter, but even the laughter sounds different now, more cautious, more brittle, echoing against the silence that waits outside. Here, tongues loosen with every cup, but you sense that even in this dim, crowded space, caution has become a habit nobody can quite unlearn. You listen as a group of old men trade stories, their voices lowered, their jokes delivered with the wariness of men who have seen friends vanish for saying the wrong thing. Remember when Cicero was the loudest voice in Rome? One croaks. Now the loudest voice is the one that reads out the list of tomorrow's prices. There is laughter, dry as kindling, followed by glances at the door. Nobody finishes the thought out loud that the lists change more often than the seasons, and so do the names in power. The stories are almost never about the present. You notice this quickly. The tales told in these taverns are always safely set in the past, but the past itself has become a minefield. Heroes are now punchlines. Do not be like Brutus, someone snorts, unless you want to end up with bad luck and worse friends. The group at his table laughs, but their eyes are quick to dart away, searching for anyone who might have overheard. Someone starts a story about Cato the Younger, a man who once starved himself rather than submit to a tyrant. They say he was noble, the storyteller begins, but I hear he just could not stomach Roman cooking. This joke earns genuine laughter, if only for a moment. In the corner, a young man, too young to remember the wars, asks if Cato was a real person or just a story told to frighten children. An older woman shakes her head and replies, "He was real enough, but you would not recognize him now. He has been rewritten so many times that not even his own family would know him." The further the night goes, the more the stories shift from memory to farce. The deeds of Pompey become tales of a man who could never find his sandals. The wit of Cicero is reduced to endless complaints about his wife. Even Caesar is not spared. Someone claims, with a wink, that the Ides of March were just an unlucky day at the dice. These are not stories of rebellion or pride, but coping mechanisms, the only safe way to handle a past that can no longer be mourned or honored. You realize, with a slow chill, that these jokes are not harmless. They are a way to bury the past under layers of absurdity, to make the old values ridiculous so that nobody will risk missing them. There is a safety in mockery. If you can laugh at something, you do not have to grieve for it. If the Republic was always a comedy, then who would mourn its loss? But not everyone joins in. Near the back, an old woman drinks her watered wine in silence, listening without smiling. Her hands are folded in her lap, the knuckles swollen with age and memory. When someone asks her for a story, she shakes her head. I have told too many already, she says, and forgotten the ones that mattered. There is an awkward silence, quickly filled by another joke, another round of laughter. From time to time, someone grows bold or drunk enough to hint at the present. At least in the old days, you knew who to bribe, a merchant sighs, drawing a ripple of knowing chuckles. But these moments never last. The stories always slip back into the safe territory of the past, sanitized and simplified, each one ending with a punchline that makes everyone feel, for a moment, that nothing truly serious ever happened here. You notice, too, that there are certain names nobody says. The most recent dead, those lost in the last wave of purges, are mentioned only in whispers, if at all. Their stories are already fading, replaced by caricature and omission. The tavern's walls, once covered in carved initials and half forgotten slogans, are scrubbed clean. A new set of rules hangs by the door. No political talk, no talk of the Senate, no singing of the old songs. You step outside for air and hear the city breathing quietly in the dark, each house holding its own secrets, each family tending its own silences. You wonder if anyone will remember these stories in years to come, or if the laughter will be all that survives, a nervous, hollow echo of lives that once meant more. On your way home, you pass another tavern, the laughter inside already starting to sound more like coughing than cheer. You think of the heroes reduced to jokes, of the history rewritten as farce, and you realize how thoroughly the new age has conquered the old, not by force alone, but by making the very idea of resistance seem absurd. You return to your quiet home, the jokes still ringing in your ears. Perhaps tomorrow someone will tell a story about this night, and perhaps it too will become a joke, safe, small, and easily forgotten. And outside, in the dark corners where the old songs linger, you hear nothing but the wind, carrying away every punchline, every memory, every name. Morning comes with its usual grayness, and you step into a city that feels younger and older at once. In the neighborhoods where children once ran wild, staging imaginary battles and dreaming of political triumphs, you notice a new quietness, a narrowing of imagination that seems to have settled like dust on every doorstep. You pass a group of boys gathered beneath a crumbling portico, their voices low, their faces cautious. They are not pretending to be consuls or shouting orders as great generals. There is no wooden sword play, no reenactments of the Republic's famous victories. Instead, they are learning how to march in step, how to salute properly, how to recite the names of Augustus's victories without missing a syllable. Their dreams are not of wild exploits or of earning a name to echo through history, but of avoiding mistakes, of pleasing their fathers, of finding a secure place in the new order. You recall stories your elders once told you, how, not so long ago, even the humblest families would invent noble ancestors for their children. Boys would boast of imagined glories. My grandfather marched with Caesar, while their sisters played at being Vestal virgins, daring to pass judgment in mock trials in the shade of olive trees. Now, those games have faded away. You see children practicing their reading with lists of imperial decrees and memorizing the names of Augustus's relatives, a never ending roll call of titles and honors that mean little to anyone but must not be forgotten. You linger near a small school where a weary teacher drills her students in the correct forms of address. To whom do we owe our lives? She prompts. To Augustus, the children respond, not with pride or excitement, but with the dull certainty of a rule that cannot be questioned. When she asks them about Rome's heroes, the answers come haltingly. One girl dares to name a Republican general, only to be corrected. We honor him for serving Augustus. The girl nods, lowering her eyes. Her classmates glance at her, relieved that her mistake will not cost them all. In the back row, a boy daydreams, but even his daydreams are shaped by the times. He imagines not leading legions or saving the republic, but growing up to be a secretary, a scribe, or perhaps, if fortune is kind, a priest in the emperor's cult. These are the ambitions left to young Romans, not glory, but position, not risk, but approval, not greatness, but survival. You watch as an older youth is summoned by his father, a minor functionary. The boy stands straight, hands at his sides, eyes forward. He is being trained to navigate the narrow, invisible corridors of favor and suspicion that define adult life in Rome. His father quizzes him on regulations, on the proper way to submit a petition, on the rules for reporting a neighbor's suspicious behavior. There is pride in the man's voice, but it is pride tinged with fear. He is not raising a hero, but a survivor. You stroll through a park where children used to chase each other around the statues of forgotten gods. Today, those statues serve as backdrops for organized games, supervised by officials in stiff uniforms. There are no shouts of freedom or victory, only the call and response of discipline. When one child tries to invent a new game, the others hesitate, waiting to see if it will be allowed. It is not. The supervisor calls the group to order, and the game ends before it begins. At the city's edge, you see a group of apprentices, not much older than children, listening as a foreman lectures them on the virtues of obedience and hard work. Your duty is to Rome, he intones, and Rome is Augustus. The apprentices nod, repeating the lesson by rote. One of them glances at you with an expression that is impossible to read. Resentment, perhaps, or longing, or simply boredom. Whatever he feels, he keeps it to himself. You remember a festival from your own childhood, the chaos and excitement as you and your friends stormed an imaginary senate, debating, arguing, plotting fantastical reforms. There is no such noise now. The children you see are careful, quiet, watching each other for cues on how to behave. They have learned that attention is dangerous, that standing out is a risk, that glory belongs to the emperor alone. Occasionally, you overhear a story still told in secret, a whispered tale of a hero who once defied the odds or sacrificed everything for honor. But these stories are growing rarer, receding into private memory, retold only in the quiet moments when children are sure they will not be overheard. Even then, they are usually followed by a warning, but that was long ago. Things are different now. You realize as you walk through the city that the future being shaped is one of obedience, not aspiration. The energy that once fueled Rome's relentless ambition is being redirected into careful conformity, into the small, safe dreams of getting by and staying unnoticed. The names of great men still hang on street corners and in textbooks, but the children have learned not to reach for them. You watch the sun set over the city, the marble gleaming with a cold, distant light. The next generation of Romans is growing up, but you can already see that their Rome will not be one of heroes or legends. It will be a city of rules, of rituals, of whispered jokes, and carefully managed hopes. You wonder, with a dull ache, if the world will ever again see Romans who dream of greatness, or if the greatest ambition left to them will be to avoid trouble and keep their heads down. You suspect the answer is already written in the silence that settles over the city's playgrounds, in the careful steps of its youth, in the way the word glory has become something best left unspoken. The clatter of chisels and the steady thud of hammers have become as much a part of Rome's new dawn as the distant calls of city criers and the endless murmuring of bureaucrats. You find yourself, on many days, standing in the shadow of scaffolding, watching the army of stonecutters, masons, and laborers as they raise yet another temple to the glory of Augustus, to peace, to order, or simply to the idea of newness itself. The city is littered with these new constructions. It seems that every open square, every spare patch of earth between the winding streets and the markets is being claimed by marble and brick. You watch the progress with a mix of curiosity and growing indifference. The first temple seemed magnificent, the second impressive, the third and fourth a blur, and by the fifth you find yourself struggling to remember which god or which principle each building is supposed to honor. You recall the temples of your childhood, each one a unique place, old, mysterious, and imbued with the character of its neighborhood. The temple of Vesta was round and small, always glowing with warmth. The temple of Jupiter, vast and echoing, its roof darkened by centuries of smoke and hope. Even the shrines of lesser gods, Fortuna, Mercury, Flora, stood out in your memory, each attended by its own small cult, each alive with the clutter and color of popular devotion. But now, all the new temples are the same. You stand and watch as the foundations are laid, the columns raised, the pediments set in place. Every angle is precise, every step according to plan. The marble is bright, freshly quarried, its surface unmarked by the passage of time or the hands of pilgrims. The statues, too, are uniform. Augustus's serene face gazing out from every altar, flanked by identical representations of peace, victory, or order. Sometimes even the gods themselves look tired. You overhear a group of workers grumbling as they hoist another statue into place. "Which one is this?" asks a young laborer, wiping sweat from his brow. "Peace," answers his foreman without looking up. "Or maybe order. It does not matter. They all pay the same." The men laugh, but it is a tired laughter, the kind that ends quickly and leaves only silence. On festival days, the new temples are the focus of carefully organized ceremonies. You attend one out of duty, curious to see what has replaced the riotous old rituals. The priests are dressed in spotless robes, their movements rehearsed and restrained. They chant the prescribed prayers, burn the sanctioned incense, and accept offerings from a line of dignitaries, each stepping forward in the proper order. The crowd claps politely at the right moments. A group of children scatter petals, each petal the same shade of white, each movement the same as the last ceremony and the one before. You notice that the citizens participate with a sense of weary obligation. The old women whisper that the bread is drier than last year. The young men watch the ceremony with vacant eyes, already thinking of other errands. Even the priests, once respected and sometimes feared, now look like nervous administrators, careful to avoid the smallest mistake. Each prayer, each blessing is carefully worded, checked, and double checked. The gods are invoked as if by rote, their favor assumed, their wrath irrelevant. You wonder, idly, where all the individuality has gone. Each new temple is a copy of the last, as if the city has lost its taste for risk, for creativity, for difference. The architects boast of symmetry, of imperial harmony, of a new age of order. You think of the older temples, how their cracks, their faded murals, their uneven stones gave them life, made them a part of the people who worshipped there. The new buildings are perfect, but lifeless. They belong to no one. Sometimes you see the old temples shuttered, their doors sealed, their altars cold. Rumors spread about which shrines have lost their official approval, which cults have been quietly discouraged. The statues of forgotten gods are taken down and carried off in carts, their faces quickly replaced with likenesses of Augustus. In some neighborhoods, the people still leave offerings at the old altars, but always quickly, always glancing over their shoulders. You witness a strange conversation between two priests, one old, one young, outside a half finished temple. The younger man is eager, reciting the new prayers by heart, praising the beauty of the unblemished marble. The older priest gazes at the construction in silence, then finally says, "It is a beautiful shell, but there is no spirit in it." The young priest shrugs, as if spirit is less important than a flawless floor or the perfect symmetry of columns. As the weeks pass, more temples rise. You find it difficult to care. The ceremonies continue, the incense burns, the marble gleams, and the crowds dutifully attend. But something vital has been lost, a sense of connection, of belonging, of the sacred as something living and unpredictable. You realize as you watch the city remake itself in endless, perfect repetition that the age of Augustus is building not just new temples, but a new kind of Rome. It is a city of surfaces, of impressions, of sameness. The monuments to glory have become monuments to conformity. Each new building stands as a silent witness, not to faith or hope, but to the triumph of routine. And so, another temple is finished, another ribbon cut, another prayer recited. You watch the procession drift past, the crowd dispersing as quickly as it gathered. The marble gleams in the sun, cold and unmarked, and you wonder how long it will be before anyone remembers which god was meant to be honored here, or if it was ever about the gods at all. Time passes, measured now less by the movement of the sun than by the regular rhythm of imperial rituals and public decrees. Each week brings another ceremony, another reform, another festival honoring Augustus and his restoration of order. The banners hang everywhere, on temples, on markets, even on the laundry lines that cross the narrowest streets. Rome is dressed for triumph, and yet you cannot help but notice the ones who should be celebrating most of all are the ones who seem the most exhausted. You see them in every parade and on every public occasion, the faces of victory, carefully arranged at the front of the crowd, their tunics immaculate, their laurels perfectly set. These are the generals who followed Augustus at Actium, the senators who pledged their loyalty before the outcome was certain, the relatives who secured their future with the right marriage or the right betrayal, the poets, the chroniclers, the builders of new monuments, the winners. At first glance, they look like statues, dignified, proud, serene. But as you watch, the illusion crumbles. You notice the dark circles under their eyes, the deep lines carved into their cheeks, the way their hands tremble ever so slightly when they lift a goblet and toast. Even their smiles seem brittle, fixed in place by long habit and the knowledge that they must never let them slip. One morning, you find yourself walking behind a column of imperial officials as they make their way to a dedication ceremony. Their conversation is hushed, almost anxious. One complains about the endless paperwork. Every triumph comes with more lists than laurels, while another mutters about the strain of maintaining appearances. It is not enough to have won, he says quietly. One must look as though one enjoys it. They reach the steps of the new temple, straighten their backs, and arrange their faces into expressions of polite exultation. The city's elite have become masters of weary performance. At feasts, you watch as they raise their cups to Augustus, their voices echoing through vast halls decorated with fresh marble and tired laughter. The toasts are longer each year, the compliments more extravagant, but the eyes above the cups rarely shine with genuine delight. A senator at your table stifles a yawn as another guest recites a poem in honor of the new era. The applause is polite, restrained, and quickly fades. You notice, too, how the families of the victors move through the city, always together, always watched, always performing. The wives exchange greetings in the markets, their voices measured, their words carefully chosen. The children are impeccably dressed and perfectly silent, their faces already trained to betray nothing. Everyone knows that a careless remark, a careless friend, a careless moment can turn triumph into exile, favor into suspicion. In the quieter moments, you see the cracks in the facade. You watch a veteran, medals shining on his chest, sit alone at the edge of a public garden, staring at nothing. When a child approaches to ask about his battles, he only shakes his head and waves the boy away. There is nothing to tell, he says, and the words hang heavy in the air. You suspect he has told the story so many times that it no longer feels real, if it ever did. Sometimes you overhear conversations that are more honest, but always in whispers, always behind closed doors. Two women, both relatives of prominent men, share their anxieties over tea. How much longer do we have to pretend we are grateful for peace? Asks one, rubbing her forehead as if to wipe away the years. The other shrugs, her eyes weary. As long as it is safer than the alternative, she replies. They laugh, but the laughter is thin and quickly dies. Even Augustus's closest companions are not immune. You catch a glimpse of Marcus Agrippa, the emperor's right hand, leaving a council meeting, his face gray with fatigue. The rumor among the servants is that he no longer sleeps through the night, haunted by the endless demands of administration, the endless need to project strength, unity, gratitude. The emperor himself is spoken of in tones of reverence and worry, a man who won every battle, but who now fights time, illness, and the slow erosion of certainty. The victors are invited to more and more ceremonies, each one a little grander, a little more ornate, a little emptier than the last. The processions are longer, the speeches more elaborate, the sacrifices more costly. But you see the guests drifting through them in a kind of daze, eyes glazed, smiles forced. The wine flows freely, but does little to lift the mood. After the public celebrations, the most successful men slip away early, pleading fatigue, family obligations, or urgent business of state. You suspect the only urgency is the need to escape. At night, as the city quiets and the lamps burn low, you sometimes pass by the houses of the triumphant. Through open windows, you hear muted voices, sometimes raised, sometimes pleading, sometimes silent. You wonder what they say when the doors are closed, when the statues and chroniclers are not watching. You wonder if they ever allow themselves to grieve for what was lost along the way. You realize, in the end, that the cost of victory is not just the burden of those defeated, but a weight that settles over the winners as well. Rome is peaceful, unified, and rebuilt, but all its brightest faces have dulled, all its most triumphant voices have grown hoarse. The city is full of victors who do not feel victorious, who look ahead and see only more of the same, more celebrations, more reforms, more endless vigilance against the possibility of change. The only ones who seem untouched by fatigue are the statues. You pass them every day. Augustus, Agrippa, victory, peace, faces smooth, eyes empty, shoulders forever unbowed, but you know better. You have seen the men behind the marble, and you know that even victory, especially victory, is a kind of defeat. You return home, your footsteps echoing on the cold stone streets. Rome is triumphant, Rome endures, but Rome is tired, and so are you. It is said that a city's soul is revealed in its celebrations. Once, Rome's holidays pulsed with wild unpredictability, days when order loosened its grip, and even the poorest citizen might lose himself in revelry, laughter, and the dangerous thrill of forgetting tomorrow. But now, as the festivals of the new era parade relentlessly across the calendar, you witness the transformation of joy into ceremony, spontaneity into schedule, life into performance. It begins before dawn with the preparation for the emperor's birthday, a day that, according to official pronouncements, should be the happiest of the year. You wake to the sound of drums, not played with abandon by excited youths, but tapped precisely by soldiers marking time for the city's awakening. Banners are unfurled, all bearing the same slogans in the same shade of official red, and workers sweep the streets in straight lines, their movements synchronized as if to avoid any suggestion of chaos. As the sun rises, you walk toward the forum, drawn by habit more than anticipation. You remember how, years ago, the streets would fill with the sound of flutes, laughter, and the distant shouting of dice games in alleyways. The air would carry the scent of roasting meat and spilled wine, the happy disorder of a city briefly released from its burdens. This morning, there is order. The meat is measured and distributed at fixed stations. The wine is rationed, not poured. The laughter is polite, always a beat too late, never more than a ripple before it is swallowed by the next official announcement. The main ceremony unfolds according to a program posted on every street corner. Each hour is accounted for. A prayer at the new temple, a recitation by school children, a display of athletic prowess in the square. You take your place among the crowd, standing as directed behind a painted line. A crier moves through the ranks, reminding everyone when to cheer, when to wave, when to stand in solemn silence. The priests lead a sacrifice in Augustus's name. The lamb, freshly scrubbed, is presented and dispatched with a practiced gesture. The prayers are read, voices blending in perfect monotony. There is no weeping, no wild singing, none of the old cries for favor or mercy. The gods, at least those still officially recognized, are invoked in the order decreed by the imperial calendar. The crowd bows its heads together, a single mass of choreographed devotion. Children are ushered onto the steps of the new temple, their togas spotless, their faces a mixture of pride and boredom. They perform a song in honor of Augustus, their voices clear, their eyes scanning the faces in the crowd for signs of parental approval or official attention. You notice that the melody is the same as last month's hymn for the Day of Concord, and the words only slightly changed. No one minds. The point is not to celebrate, but to be seen to celebrate. You slip away to visit a friend in a less fashionable district where the old traditions sometimes linger. Even here, behind closed doors, the holiday feels thinner, its energy drained by years of official oversight. The food is good, the wine better, but the stories are muted and the toasts short. Someone tries to start a song from the old Saturnalia, half remembered, off key, quickly silenced by a nervous look toward the window. We are too old for such nonsense, says your host with a forced smile, and pours another round. The silence that follows is heavy. Back in the streets, the parade continues. Floats roll past, each one approved by the city's magistrates. Scenes from Augustus's life, scenes from the great battles, scenes of happy citizens offering thanks. Actors in white masks reenact the emperor's victories, their gestures grand but empty. You remember how once the mummers would lampoon the powerful, slipping barbed jokes into the festivities, making the city laugh at itself. There are no jokes now, only applause and the rhythmic chanting of slogans. As evening falls, torches are lit along the avenues. The crowds are ushered toward the forum for the closing ceremony. A speech from the city's prefect, more prayers, another hymn. You watch as families gather, their children leaning against tired mothers, their fathers already looking for excuses to leave early. The holiday is nearly over, and with it the obligation to appear joyful. You notice how quickly the square empties when the last note fades. People return to their homes, their shops, their private lives. The banners droop in the night breeze, the torches gutter out, and the workers begin to sweep the streets again, erasing all traces of the celebration before dawn. You walk home through silent alleys, the only sound your own footsteps echoing off the stone. At your doorway, you pause to remember the holidays of your childhood, the unruly, passionate, sometimes dangerous joys that once made Rome feel alive. You remember the chaos, the laughter, the music that never stopped. You remember, most of all, the sense that for a little while the city belonged to everyone. Now, the holidays are for Augustus. The people attend, they perform, they recite the words and sing the songs. They do not dance, they do not shout, they do not dare. And as you close your door, you wonder if, in the end, joy can survive in a city that has learned to hide it, to measure it, to rehearse it until all that remains is a perfect, shining surface and the hollow echo of what used to be. After the last festival banner is taken down and the final echoes of rehearsed hymns have faded into silence, you find yourself standing at the edge of a Rome that feels less like a city and more like a stage after a disappointing play. The marble streets are spotless, the air is still, and everywhere there is a strange collective pause, as if the entire city is waiting for a cue that will never come. It is not that the people of Rome do not understand what has happened. Even the youngest child knows, in some unspoken way, that there is no going back to the old days. The Republic, whatever it meant, now seems as distant and unlikely as Troy, a place of myth, more useful for stories and warnings than for hope. The present, meanwhile, is full of lists, rules, decrees, and new statues that multiply faster than anyone can remember their meanings. You look into the eyes of those around you and see the same dull recognition, the realization that what has been lost cannot be recovered, and that what has been gained comes with its own invisible cost. The city is quieter now, not just in sound, but in spirit. Even the river Tiber seems to flow more slowly, winding through the heart of Rome like a memory that cannot decide whether it is welcome or not. In the forum, you overhear a group of tradesmen discussing the future. One shakes his head, eyes on the polished stones beneath his feet. "We have order," he says, "and perhaps that is all we will have." Another sighs and mutters, "Order is for the dead." The others laugh, but not with real mirth. Their laughter is the last tool they have left for keeping despair at bay. You wander past the newly built temples, gleaming and empty, past the rows of official banners and slogans, past the guards who no longer seem to watch the people, but simply the spaces between them. Everyone moves carefully now, as if the ground itself were fragile or cursed. You see young couples speaking softly, lovers' quarrels reduced to anxious negotiations about the right words to use in the wrong place. Even the arguments have changed, stripped of passion and replaced with cautious phrasing, no longer about ideals or loyalty, but about how best to navigate a world where hope itself has been quietly reclassified as a risk. There are new customs for everything: how to greet your neighbor, how to celebrate a birth, how to mourn the dead. You attend a funeral and notice how even the tears seem rehearsed, as if the mourners fear being accused of excessive feeling. The eulogy is brief, delivered in the safe, official phrases that have become the city's new poetry. He served Rome, he loved Augustus, he died in peace. The old words of remembrance, once full of laughter, tears, and honest anger, are missing. Nobody seems to notice, or perhaps nobody dares. You watch as old friendships fray and dissolve, not in arguments, but in silence. It is safer not to be too close to anyone, safer not to remember too well. Neighbors nod politely in the streets, then quickly move on. Families grow smaller, their stories quieter, their ambitions scaled down to survival and routine. The dreams of youth have withered, the ambitions of age have been put away with the household gods, now gathering dust in forgotten corners. On the steps of a public building, you see a boy, perhaps 12 years old, studying his lessons. You glance over his shoulder and read the neat lines of imperial dogma, copied carefully in a hand that has known more practice than inspiration. Order is peace. Peace is happiness. Happiness is service. You wonder if he believes any of it, or if he simply knows, as everyone else now does, that belief is less important than obedience. Even the city's light has changed. The sunsets seem paler, as if the sun itself is reluctant to give Rome too much color. The evenings bring not conversation and song, but a slow, heavy quiet, broken only by the measured steps of the night watch. You walk the empty streets and feel as if you are moving through a dream someone else has written, a dream in which every surprise is dangerous and every joy is temporary. In your own home, you find yourself speaking less, listening more, and wondering at times whether you are truly living or only following a script. The rituals that once held meaning, prayers at the altar, stories by the hearth, the simple pleasure of breaking bread with friends, have become mechanical, like the regular tolling of the city's bells. You go through the motions because to do otherwise is to invite questions, and questions are best left unasked. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, you remember the faces of those who once believed in the Republic, in greatness, in glory, even in change. You wonder where they have gone, or if they simply stopped believing because the city no longer makes room for such things. The new era is here, and its promise is not happiness or honor or hope, but the quiet comfort of predictability, of a life so carefully measured that nothing can go wrong and nothing will ever truly go right. You realize, with a weary certainty, that this is the price of Augustus's triumph, a Rome that is finally at peace, but at the cost of the hunger that once made it great. The streets are safer, the forums are orderly, the future is clear and unchanging. All that is missing is the pulse of genuine feeling, the messy, dangerous, beautiful possibility that things might be different. As you look out over the city, the marble shining in the moonlight, you feel the weight of the new era settle on your shoulders, not as a crown, but as a blanket, heavy and dull, muffling every sound. And in the hush that follows, you understand that Rome has been remade, not just in stone and law, but in the hearts of its people. The age has changed, and with it, so have you. In the weeks after the last great ceremony, the new age settles itself into every shadow and echo of Rome so thoroughly that you begin to wonder how much of the city's memory has already slipped quietly into oblivion. You find yourself walking the familiar streets with a peculiar sense of detachment, as if you are observing someone else's dream. A city that resembles Rome, but where everything meaningful is being quietly erased, repainted, or rewritten. It starts with small things, the words that disappear from conversation, the stories that nobody finishes, the statues whose names fade as quickly as their inscriptions. You notice how easily the memory of yesterday is replaced by the decree of today. The Republic, the wars, even the victories are mentioned less and less, their details dissolving into the mist of polite forgetfulness. At the baker's stall, an old man tries to recall the name of a senator who once defended the city during a siege. He was a great man. What was his name? He saved the southern wall. The baker shrugs, uninterested. The line moves on and the old man falls silent, the name lost to the clatter of coins and the scent of new bread. The moment passes, and with it, another thread of memory unravels. You pass the forum and see the statues standing in dignified rows, but the people walking past rarely pause to read the plaques. Most are content with the new names, the new stories, the version of history that fits the present mood. The children, if they notice at all, giggle at the old styles of dress, imitating the stiff postures and odd gestures of men whose importance faded before they were born. When asked about the past, they recite only what is required, no more. You stop at a bookseller's cart and see a pile of discarded scrolls, their edges curling, the ink faded. Nobody buys the old speeches, the bookseller tells you, almost apologetically. People want stories of Augustus now. They say the rest is just trouble. He offers you a copy of a new official history, one that tells of Rome's rise in a series of clear, heroic episodes, all roads leading inevitably to the current peace. You thumb through it and see that the heroes of other ages have been reduced to footnotes, their motives simplified, their flaws omitted. Oblivion is everywhere, but it does not arrive with violence. It seeps in quietly, like water into cracked stone. You notice the way your neighbors remember things differently with each telling. A riot that becomes a mere protest, a lost friend who turns into a distant acquaintance, a rumor that takes the place of an entire year's worth of events. You find yourself doubting your own memories. Were there really banners with the names of Brutus and Cassius fluttering over the forum? Did the Senate ever command respect, or was that just something you heard in stories? The city's new chroniclers work late into the night, editing and embellishing, choosing which facts to preserve and which to let drift away. Each morning, the official record grows longer, but the past becomes shorter. The timeline of Rome smoothed and polished until only the safest versions remain. It is not just that the losers are forgotten, but that the entire notion of loss itself is disappearing. Sometimes you visit the places where great things once happened, a crossroads where a speech changed history, an alley where a friend was betrayed, a garden where, for a single evening, you believed the future might be different. You stand in these spots and try to recall what was said, what was promised, what was felt. The effort leaves you tired, the details fuzzy. The city has learned not to look back, and so, slowly, have you. Your own family is not immune. The children remember only what they are taught, and even the elders seem to surrender their stories with surprising ease. It is better to forget, says your uncle, staring into his cup. Otherwise, you begin to believe that nothing ever really changes, and that is a dangerous thought. You nod, though you are not sure you agree, and you wonder if you will remember this conversation, or if it too will fade. There are, of course, those who resist, quietly, furtively. In back rooms and hidden corners, old poems are recited, old names whispered. But even these acts of defiance feel fragile, endangered by time and fatigue. You realize that memory itself is a kind of burden, and Rome, having shouldered so much, is eager to put it down. One evening, you find yourself at the edge of the city, staring out at the countryside, the distant farms, the hills bathed in twilight. You try to recall the city as it was, the noise, the crowds, the arguments, the chaos and hope. It comes to you only in flashes, the way a torch-lit procession once looked from above, the feel of dust underfoot, the taste of wine at a friend's table. But the harder you try to hold on, the more the details slip away, replaced by the certainty that the only thing Rome now remembers is what it must. Oblivion is not a flood, but a gentle tide, washing away the sharp edges, the inconvenient questions, the memories that might threaten the new peace. And as you stand beneath the moon, listening to the quiet city, you wonder how long it will be before even these doubts are gone, before you too become another silent witness, another ghost in the city of endless forgetting. When you return home, you find a child reading a new history of Rome, the pages clean and hopeful, the stories simple, the past comfortably distant. You watch, not with anger or even sadness, but with the resigned acceptance that this too is part of the new era, the slow, almost painless surrender of memory, the embrace of oblivion. And in the hush that follows, you feel yourself letting go. The night is cool and the city is nearly silent, a rare stillness settling over the stones and streets that have carried so much noise, so many footsteps, so many voices now hushed. You find yourself drawn back to the Forum, the heart of Rome, where the marble statues stand beneath the indifferent gaze of the moon, each one a monument not only to the past, but to the endless act of remembering and forgetting that defines the city. You pause before the statue of Augustus, newly erected, its lines crisp, its gaze serene and absolute. Around him cluster the older statues, Julius Caesar, already touched by rain and pigeons, faded generals with broken noses, mythical founders whose stories have become so tangled with lies and longing that even the chroniclers cannot quite agree on the details. They are arranged in a silent congress, each one once the face of a new age, each one now a fixed point in the landscape of memory. You wonder how many times the scene has played out, how many ages the city has witnessed, how many more it will survive. The stones at your feet are layered with the dust of centuries, each step echoing all those that came before, triumphs, betrayals, celebrations, purges, reconciliations, and yet another round of reforms. Rome has been reborn so often that even its ruins are foundations for something else, its monuments built on the bones of those who thought their story would be the last. The faces of the statues watch you with that peculiar, impassive patience of stone, their silence more eloquent than 100 speeches. You remember the words spoken at the latest festival, words about eternal unity, perpetual victory, unending peace, and you wonder how long such claims will last before they are replaced by newer words, fresher slogans, brighter banners. The city is good at beginning again, at erasing the scars and repainting the walls, at pretending that each generation is the first to hope and the last to be disappointed. You sit on the edge of the rostra, the marble cold and unyielding beneath you. The forum is empty, but you can almost hear the ghostly murmurs of the crowds that have stood here for centuries, pleading for bread, for justice, for meaning. In their faces, you see your own, patient, exhausted, longing for change yet suspicious of it, always aware that tomorrow will look much like today, only with new statues and new names. You look up at the sky, searching for omens. Once, the augurs would have filled the air with interpretations, birds flying in the wrong direction, clouds gathering at the wrong time, the stars refusing to align. Now, the sky is simply sky, silent and vast, unmoved by the smallness of the city below. You realize that the gods, if they ever cared, have long since learned to watch Rome with the same weary amusement that the Romans reserve for their own leaders. The marble faces seem to ask you a question. What will you remember, and what will you choose to forget? The answer, you suspect, is neither as simple nor as final as you would wish. You will remember the shape of these nights, the weight of this silence, the bittersweet taste of knowing that you were present at the birth of an era that feels already old and inevitable. You rise, your shadow stretching long across the flagstones, and begin to walk away. The city is behind you, and before you, its lights glowing softly in the distance, each window holding another story, another secret, another witness to time's slow, grinding patience. You feel the pull of home, the comfort of routine, the certainty that, for all the changes, the deep rhythm of Rome endures. As you leave the forum, you take one last look at the statues, their forms etched into memory by moonlight and loss. You know that one day, even these faces will fade, their stories rewritten, their deeds questioned, their triumphs filed away beneath layers of new marble and new myth. Rome will wake again and again, each age believing it is unique, each age learning, sooner or later, that everything returns. You are only a witness, after all, one among thousands who have watched empires rise and fall, who have waited in crowds for speeches that promised a new world, who have lived through changes that felt final and found them only the prelude to more of the same. As you step into the darkened streets, you feel the strange comfort of belonging to something larger than yourself, a city, a history, an endless succession of beginnings and endings. And in that moment, you know, Rome will see many more ages, and someone, somewhere, will always be standing where you stand, looking at the marble and wondering how much of any of it will last. The city sleeps, but the stones remember. You walk on, a shadow among shadows, and behind you the statues keep their silent, patient watch.